Good evening and welcome. My name is Jim Lawrence. I'm the board chair at Fixing San Mateo County. Again, thank you for joining us on this nonpartisan event that's very strict history making. And thank you for taking an interest in the Sheriff's Office. Fixing San Mateo County, as you know, is a grassroots nonprofit organization that was created to advocate for independent oversight of the Sheriff's Office. One of our core beliefs is that the community should be well informed about what is happening in and around our Sheriff's Office. That's why we felt called to help educate people about the election taking place here on March 4th. Fixing San Mateo County is consistently advocating for systematic change through effective, independent oversight. We do not endorse or oppose any specific sheriff or candidate for sheriff, and we never endorse or oppose Measure A. Accountability isn't about an individual. It's about ongoing, institutionalized to ensure safety and fair treatment for everyone now and into the future. Systematic problems require systematic solutions. That's why, regardless of the outcome of this election, Fixing will continue to advocate for effective oversight in the form of a permanent inspector general and a strong, empowered civilian oversight commission. We're going to take your questions about Measure A after a brief presentation. Please put your questions in the chat. And now I'd like to pass the mic to my fellow colleague, Michelle LePeters, to offer a description of Measure A and how it came about.
Thank you, Jim. So what is Measure A? Measure A is a ballot measure which San Mateo County residents will vote on in the March 4th special election. The measure, if approved, would amend the county charter of San Mateo County. The measure reads in full, shall the measure amending the San Mateo County charter to grant the Board of Supervisors authority until December 31st, 2028 to remove an elected sheriff from office for cause, including for violation of law related to a sheriff's duties, flagrant or repeated neglect of duties, misappropriation of public funds, willful falsification of documents, or obstructing an investigation by a 4/5 vote of the Board of Supervisors, after written notice and an opportunity to be heard, be adopted. The key provisions of the measure are it would permit the Board of Supervisors to remove the elected sheriff from their position under certain circumstances. At least 4 out of the 5 supervisors would have to vote for removal for it to take effect. The circumstances that would allow the board to remove the sheriff include the sheriff committing any of the following things: illegal acts related to the sheriff's duties, serious neglect of their duties as sheriff, misuse of public funds, intentionally putting false information in public documents, or obstructing or interfering with an investigation. Before the board could vote to remove the sheriff would receive a written notice of their intent and would be given an opportunity to present their case to the board. This power would end on December 31st, 2028, unless extended by another ordinance. If the measure is passed by a majority of voters, it does not mean the sheriff is removed. It gives the board the authority to take their own separate vote to remove the sheriff, after providing the written notice and opportunity for the sheriff to be heard. Why is this being proposed now? The special election to vote on Measure A was called by the Board of Supervisors following an investigation into the leadership of the sheriff's office. Due to a large number of human resources complaints lodged by sheriff's office personnel against the sheriff and her chief of staff, the board hired retired Superior Court Judge Ladoris Cordell to investigate these allegations. Judge Cordell's investigation resulted in a final report issued in November of 2024. That report found that Sheriff Corpus engaged in retaliation, intimidation, and conflicts of interest, and made racial and homophobic slurs, among other findings. The report concluded that the only way to restore function to the sheriff's office would be the replacement of Sheriff's Office leadership, including Sheriff Corpus and her Chief of Staff, Victor Anye. The entire report is available to the public. You can find a link to that report, as well as updates about events since then, on our website at fixonsmc.org. After the release of the report, the Board of Supervisors passed a resolution calling on Sheriff Corpus to resign. Sheriff Corpus has denied the allegations and findings in the report, and so far has rejected calls for her resignation. The Board of Supervisors does not currently have the authority under the county's charter to remove the sheriff for cause. The county does have the power under the California State Constitution to amend the county charter by a ballot measure. If Measure A passes in the special election, it would give them that authority. The board would then have the power to remove the sheriff by a vote of 4 out of 5 supervisors, after giving the sheriff written notice and an opportunity to be heard. This new power to remove the sheriff would sunset in 2028. If Measure A does not pass, the next election for sheriff takes place in 2028. The Board of Supervisors also referred the report to the county district attorney and the state attorney general to review, as well as a civil grand jury. These are alternative means to remove an elected official, although they are complex and could take years. Sheriff Corpus has chosen not to resign, and it is important to note that she denies the allegations in and findings of the Cordell report. She has filed a lawsuit against the county alleging discrimination and harassment by county officials. She is also suing to stop the March 4th special election taking place. Next, I'd like to introduce my colleagues, Elsa and Bill, who will present the arguments that have been made both for and against Measure A, which are set forth in the ballot materials sent to voters. To be clear, this is not Fixin SMC's commentary or opinion about the pro and con positions. This comes straight from the information provided to voters. We neither dispute nor verify their content. None of these arguments reflect the official position of Fixin San Mateo County or the co-sponsors of this event, but are being presented for your information. Elsa?
Thank you, Michelle. So I'm the for person for Measure A per the ballot information from the Elections Office. This measure provides checks and balances on the sheriff's otherwise unchecked power. There's no boss in the neighborhood. There should be consequences for the allegations that were sustained in Judge Cordell's report, where she interviewed 60 people. The allegations in the report could lead to tens of millions of dollars of lawsuits against the county, all of which are paid by taxpayers. The measure expires in 2028 at the next presidential election, making it a focused and time-limited power. Most of the executive leadership of the sheriff's office has already resigned or been fired. The 2 assistant sheriff positions are vacant. The Deputy Sheriff's Association, the Organization of Sheriff's Sergeants, and the 5 remaining captains in the sheriff's office have called on Sheriff Corpus to resign. If the sheriff's own employees don't believe she can do the job, the public has no reason to trust that she can. These arguments in favor of Measure A were submitted by, and this is the group of people that signed them, Congresswoman Anna Eshoo, Congressman Kevin Mullen, Supervisor Noelia Corzo, Matt Solano of the Deputy Sheriff's Association, and Sean Harper of the Organization of Sheriff's Sergeants. They were also supported by Assemblymember Diane Pappin, by Supervisor Lisa Gaucher, by South San Francisco Mayor Eddie Flores, by the ICAC Chair Kalima Salahuddin. ICAC is the Independent Civilian Advisory Commission to the Board of Supervisors on the Sheriff's Office, and also was signed by former State Senator Jerry Hill. And I now pass the mic to Bill Newell. He will give you the arguments against Measure A.
Thank you, Elsa. The arguments against Measure A include 4 points. Point 1, this measure strips voters of their right to select an independent sheriff. Second, it is an attempt by the Board of Supervisors to remove the sheriff so they can appoint a sheriff of their own choosing. Third, this measure will not survive a court challenge and violate state laws, including the Brown Act. And finally, during Sheriff Corpus' tenure, there have been sharp decreases in rapes, robberies, assaults, and stolen property, including catalytic converter theft, and no homicides in 2024 in the unincorporated San Mateo County areas. Now, these arguments against Measure A were submitted by Dan Stadink, who is a rescue diver. Next, I will pass the mic now to Trina Patton, who will be taking the questions.
Good evening, everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome to our chat Assistant County Attorney David Silberman. David, thank you for joining us this evening.
My pleasure.
Great. So I have a few questions for you. And the first one is, if Sheriff Corpus is removed by the Board of Supervisors, who will be the new sheriff?
Can't hear you.
You still can't hear me?
Now we can.
Now we can. Yes.
Okay, sorry, little delay there.
Okay.
So first, just a little bit of tiny bit of background and framing, if I could. And before I do that, I just want to note that I heard two things in the prior presentation that I think might be inadvertently inaccurate. One thing I heard was that the sunset could be taken away. The sunset, the charter sunsets. The charter meant sunsets, and then it could be taken away by ordinance. It can't be taken away by ordinance. It would require another vote of the people in order to extend the charter. And the second thing I heard was that the sheriff had filed a lawsuit alleging discrimination, and she has not yet filed a lawsuit alleging discrimination. She's filed a government claim, which is a precursor to filing a lawsuit. Just minor things, but just to make some minor corrections.
Yes, thank you for that clarification.
And I will get to your question, but just a little bit more comment. First, you correctly used my title. I'm the Assistant County Attorney. I report directly to John Niblin. I've been in the County Attorney's office now for 21 years. And I certainly have my own opinions about Measure A. And obviously the board chose to place Measure A on the ballot. But I've been invited here today by Fixon not to provide my opinions, but simply provide factual information on the law. And that's what I will do. So I ask everyone to please not interpret anything I say as advocacy. I am intentionally and carefully choosing my words so as not to be advocating for or against Measure A. And because of that, my answers may seem a little robotic, and I regret that, but I think it's for the best. Finally, before I get to the answer to that question, I just wanted to provide a little bit of context on charter counties. So, and this comes directly from the California State Association of Counties. So the California Constitution recognizes two types of counties: general law counties and charter counties. California's 40 general law counties must adhere to the general laws approved by the legislature and the governor. General law counties must follow state statutes that dictate the number, appointment, and election procedures for county officials. General law counties must also adhere to state laws which specify that county employees must perform most county functions and restrict counties' ability to contract out for services. General law counties have some flexibility with regard to supervisor salaries, the appointment of a county administrator, the election and appointment of other officers, and the number and types of employees and other matters. San Mateo County is not a general law county. We are one of the 14 charter counties. Charter counties have opted for a governing structure that allows for greater local control. By adopting and amending a charter, which is basically a mini constitution, county voters can take advantage of constitutional discretion over the county's board, officers, and employees. For example, charter counties can increase the number of county supervisors and elect them at large, appoint fewer county officers and specify their duties, contract out for any service subject to certain state contracting rules, and specify a process to fill vacancies. So San Mateo County is a charter county, and in a case called Penrod v. County of San Bernardino, and the case citation for those lawyers out there is 126 Cal App 4th 185. The California Court of Appeal concluded that a charter amendment, very much like Measure A, was legal. And that is one of the reasons why the county has argued that the sheriff's lawsuit does not have any merit. So, with that, your question was, if the sheriff is removed, how would the sheriff be removed? Was that the question?
So who will be the new sheriff? Who will be the new sheriff if the sheriff is removed?
So if the measure were to pass and the board were to decide to use it to remove the sheriff, and the sheriff was removed, what would happen next is governed by the charter. Now that part of the charter is not being changed, and it applies to any situation where any county official other than a member of the Board of Supervisors vacates their office. So it applies whether someone is removed or they resign while their term is not up. It's covered by Chapter 415, which provides in pertinent part, and I'm going to read this very small portion of the charter, but in sum, the board has the option of either appointing a replacement or calling an election. And the board has not indicated which of those it is going to do. And we'll know when it does because it has to do it in a public meeting. So if a vacancy occurs in elected office other than the Board of Supervisors, the board shall, within 30 days of the effective date of the vacancy, either make an appointment or call a special election to fill the vacancy. If the board does not make an appointment or call a special election within 30 days, the county officer responsible for conducting county elections shall immediately order a special election to be called to fill the vacancy. The appointee shall hold office if they appoint for the remainder of the term. For purposes of the charter, the special election may be conducted as an all-mail ballot election at the discretion of the board or county officer responsible for conducting the elections. The special election shall be held in not less than 102 days and not more than 131 days from the order calling the election, except that it may be held on an election date regularly established by general law if that date falls within 270 days from the order calling the special election. So the answer to your question is that it is governed by the charter, and the charter this portion of the charter will be unchanged by Measure A.
Okay, thank you very much. And so just a little bit more about the special election. When would it take place? Is there a specific timeline?
Yes, I'm sorry, and I probably said too much initially. The board has, as I noted, will have 30 days from the time that the position is vacated, and that would either be via a removal or via a resignation. The board would have 30 days to call an election, and they could do it in shorter than 30 days, but they have 30 days to do it, and then it would be either 102 within not less than 102 and not more than 131 days from the date they call the election. Again, unless they wish, and they can, schedule it for a regular election that falls within 270 days. I know it's very specific, but 270 days
Yes.
from the date the election is called.
Okay, okay. Thank you, thank you. And then a question that has come up at lots of other forums as well is how would it work for the civil grand jury to remove the sheriff?
So the grand jury process, and I know someone said this already, but I'm just going to say it again so that we're very clear. The grand jury process is completely independent, separate, in no way connected to Measure A. The grand jury has authority to issue what is called an accusation. And the process for doing that is set forth relatively simply for lawyers and legislators in the California Government Code, specifically between sections 3060 and 3075 of the California Government Code. It's 15 different sections, and I'm going to simplify it into basically 5 parts. And all of this comes directly from the Government Code. So the grand jury in San Mateo County, if a full complement exists, has 19 members. 12 of those members have to vote to issue an accusation. The accusation has to state the offense charged. And usually, well, not usually, it has to be, prior to issuing an accusation, evidence confidentially needs to be presented to the grand jury to support issuing of an accusation. The accusation, once it's issued, is delivered to the district attorney. The district attorney then serves a copy of the accusation on the elected official. If the elected official denies the accusation, it goes to a jury trial conducted like a trial of a criminal indictment. And if the jury convicts, the elected official is removed from office. The grand jury process is utilized very rarely. Most recently, it was done in Santa Clara. And I understand anecdotally, I wasn't there, but they began their process in approximately September of a year. They completed it towards the end of the year. And the trial occurred approximately and concluded approximately a year after that.
Okay. Okay. And then one final question, and that is, how does the sheriff make her case for not being removed?
So, as we discussed, if Measure A were to pass, the voters would be temporarily amending the county charter. And if the board were to decide to use it to remove the sheriff, the board would develop procedures. And it would then determine how that worked. It's clear under the charter that the sheriff is going to be given an opportunity to present her side, but exactly how she does it is going to depend on the procedures that the board adopts, and they have not adopted them yet, understandably, because the election hasn't happened yet. I note that the authority developed the charter language that you put up is the ballot language, which is absolutely correct. But the charter also includes the authority to develop the procedures. So if the voters are to enact Measure A, they will be giving the board the authority to develop the procedures that will determine how the sheriff presents her case.
All right. Well, David, thank you so much for being here and for your answers. We very much appreciate it. We're going to take questions from the chat now. And so I would like to welcome my colleague, Nancy Goodban, who's the Executive Director of Fixing San Mateo County. There's Nancy. Thank you so much. So Nancy, the first question I have is, why isn't Fixin supporting or opposing this measure?
Thank you, Trina. Basically, because Fixing is more focus on permanent structural improvements to our system of government. There are a number of different viewpoints about the merits of Measure A that aren't related to the overarching need for ongoing oversight by the civilians. And Measure A is really targeted specifically at removing the current sheriff. All the authority, of course, would sunset after a few years. But fix-and policy has always been that we focus on the systems in place, not a specific person. We think that the measure basically seeks to address a specific situation by means of a temporary fix. It falls outside our area of focus. And so we really haven't taken a position.
And so isn't this measure undemocratic?
That is one of the primary arguments being made against the measure. Some people feel that the board should never have the authority to remove the sheriff. She was elected by all the voters of the county. Any sheriff is. Others feel that because the board is also made of elected officials, that they are representing the voters with their attempt to replace the sheriff's office leadership. The board has described Measure A as a way the voters have a voice, since everyone can vote on Measure A, and the board can either appoint an interim sheriff or, as David Silverman said, call a special election and let the voters choose the sheriff. But this is one of the main arguments that the opponents are bringing up.
Thank you. So one of the questions from the chat says, having this measure sunset makes it appear like a vendetta against a specific person, in this case, Sheriff Christina Corpus. Why not have it be permanent, or else just wait for the recall, which is the existing way to remove an elected official?
And we are not going to try to answer that because we don't have an answer. What we would recommend is ask your individual supervisor, because it was the Board of Supervisors that put together the sunset clause.
Okay, thank you. And then again, in relation to the court case, we keep hearing discussions about this court case coming up on February 26th. And so as voters, we're waiting to see how it's ruled on whether or not the election will go ahead. Do you have any insight, or can you explain if the county expects this election to proceed and what may have led to the decision to take this to court?
I think we do have a link in the chat of the one news article I've seen about it, but pretty much that's all
Okay.
we know. There was an initial hearing, and the second hearing is February 26th. And, you know, it is the position of the opponents that this measure is illegal. And the Board of Supervisors doesn't believe it is, so they are going to argue it out. I think the judge's name is Healy or Neely. But the election is going to proceed. It's possible there might be future challenges or appeals. We don't know how that's going to turn out. But voting is scheduled to end on March 4th at this point.
Right.
Go
Thank
ahead
you.
and vote. You don't know.
Yeah.
Let's assume it's going to be binding. At least your
Yeah.
vote will count.
Okay, and we have another question. Maybe we might not have an answer to it. Maybe county attorney might have an answer, but she asked, I'd like to know more about what kind of precedent, if any, this sets for future ballot measures or actions from the Board of Supervisors. There are some questions and concerns about what additional powers this gives to the Board of Supervisors, if any.
Yeah, and there are two precedents from other counties. San Bernardino and Los Angeles have both passed a charter amendment that allows the Board of Supervisors to remove the sheriff for cause, which was upheld by the courts. So as far as a precedent in San Mateo County, would this apply with other elected officials? I have no idea. But all we do know is that there have been other two similar charter amendments voted on by the voters in two counties that were upheld by the courts.
Thank you. And Mr. Silverman, do you have any insight for us? No, can't hear you.
You still can't hear me?
There
Now
we
we
go.
can.
Yeah.
So weird. Yeah, I'm sorry, and I didn't mean to interrupt Ms. Goodman. You know, from a technical legal standpoint, precedent means binding. So precedent means that one thing binds another thing. One thing means another thing needs to happen. And in that sense, this charter amendment has no precedential effect. It doesn't, all this charter amendment does is gives the board the authority to do what the charter amendment allows it to do until it sunsets. It does not give the board any additional authority in the future. Once it sunsets, it is done. It is not precedential in any legal sense. As Ms. Goodban noted, San Bernardino and Los Angeles do have similar charter amendments in their charters. And as she also noted, when San Bernardino adopted their charter amendment, the sheriff sued, claiming that it was unconstitutional, and the sheriff lost.
Okay, thank you, thank you. So Nancy, one of the questions we get often is, where was this outrage from the supervisors when the previous sheriff had his misbehavings and misdealings and shenanigans? What is so important now?
Yeah, and I've heard that question too. That's a very common question that we have heard. I think we're all aware that there were serious issues in the past with the most recent sheriff, both with regard to the Operation Dollhouse in the illegal brothel about 15 years ago now in Las Vegas, and also the Batmobile scandal, which happened right after the election. At Fix and San Mateo County, we just believe that every sheriff should be held to the highest standards. They're the highest law enforcement official in the county. They're elected by the voters. And that's why we advocate for really permanent, ongoing civilian oversight and advice to the Board of Supervisors, and recommendations that can be made by an inspector general or the current Civilian Advisory Commission. I know too that this has been brought up in board hearings, and a couple of board members said, well, we weren't all here during Bolano's tenure. So that's true too. Two of the new Board of Supervisors members just took office last month.
Okay, thank you very much. And then another question that we hear a lot is, like, what is the rush? Why is it so important that we go through this, voting for the board to have this power to remove the sheriff? Why is it so urgent? Why can't we wait for a recall election?
Right. Yes. And we've definitely heard that as well. A recall, again, would probably take about a year. The county elections department said it would probably be April 2026. It could be a very slim chance it could be as early as November 2025. And I think in December 3rd, when the board was announcing this, they issued a statement saying that it's the fastest way to give voters a voice. And so they wanted voters to have a voice in this decision, and they wanted it to be quick. They have expressed, board members have expressed concern about the sheriff office readiness to act in a public safety event, or if there's some kind of a real problem that we have. So I think they wanted to get this done sooner rather than later.
Okay.
On the other hand, there's other ways for the sheriff to be removed. We talked about that through the district attorney, through the civil grand jury, or they also referred it to the state attorney general.
Great, thank you. And can you explain, what is the rationale for making the new power to remove the sheriff time limited? Like, why the sunset clause?
Right, and that's a question really truly that I think people need to ask the supervisors that question. And you could ask your own supervisor or put it out there in public comment, because there are people who are concerned and said, if you're going to do this and you're making a time limit, it looks, as we had said earlier, like kind of a vendetta against the current sheriff. And so I think can't speculate on that. I'm not aware that the board has made comments on that particular issue. So it's a fair question for our board members.
Absolutely. And do we know if San Bernardino or LA counties have sunset clauses as well in their charter amendments?
I don't know that, David.
I would have to verify. I do not believe that they do, but I will try and verify that as I'm here.
Okay. And then Nancy, kind of a fun question. Why do you think that the Board of Supervisors did not adopt Fix and San Mateo County's recommendations instead of calling for this special election?
Well, and that's a good point. Just to put in a plug for Fixin, we have the support of 5 cities and towns and 1 community council, which is North Fair Oaks, representing elected officials representing a third of the county, and 35 plus organizations, faith communities, political clubs, et cetera, who all said that we need a strong civilian oversight commission and an ongoing regular inspector general. Our position has been basically, if we had an inspector general all along, then, and I was just talking to an inspector general who in Sonoma County tonight about this very issue, then you build a relationship between the inspector general and the sheriff, and they meet regularly and they share information and they build trust. And so if there's a problem, you hit it in advance. It also gives a place, usually when there are an independent complaint process, which we don't have in this county. If you're complaining about the sheriff, you have to complain to the sheriff. And the inspector general is a place where you can get those complaints. So it's a way to kind of, you know, soften some of the concerns that are out there and try to address them before it comes to the point that you've got 150 articles in the media. The media is not oversight, people. I know it's great. We get a lot of information of them, but they have their own way of looking at things. And an inspector general is somebody who is trained, who is a professional, they're an attorney, and on an ongoing basis, that's what they do. Judge Cordell was great. She was brought in as an inspector general, but on an ad hoc basis. That's exactly what oversight would do. And our urging was just make it a long, ongoing regular thing. It's a lot cheaper than all these lawsuits.
Great, thank you. And here's another question, and again, maybe Mr. Silberman, you can weigh in on this, is if these charges against the sheriff have weight, why aren't there any criminal charges? Why is the district attorney not involved?
I can't, I'm sorry, I can't answer that question. I believe it's been reported that the DA is investigating, but I have no personal knowledge of that.
Okay. And I don't either, but again, I read it in the paper the other day that the DA said there were, I think, 5 issues that could have been criminal and they're being investigated, and he hopes to be done in 2 to 4 weeks. And I mean, this is what our DA, Steve Wagstaff said, so quoted in the paper. So I think they're looking at it. I think the problem or the issue is that some people have asked, well, why weren't there sworn statements in this report? There was a problem with the report, and it's been clarified that really the report that Judge Cordell did was looking at a series of human resources type complaints and was doing basically an HR type investigation, and that doesn't usually use sworn statements. And it was said that if the DA took it on, or the civil grand jury, that's when you start collecting sworn statements. So I think that's one reason that the district attorney would be taking some time. They're probably taking some, I'm guessing that would be what they have to do, is take some sworn statements.
Okay, and then one final question is, in the question about why the rush, oftentimes it has been said that there is a issue about public safety. And the question is that the issue of public safety seems to be more indirect rather than direct. Are there direct concerns about public safety regarding the removal of the sheriff or everything that's going on with the sheriff?
Right, like the indirect question issue would be if something happens and the sheriff doesn't have a strong set of executive staff underneath her. And I think, so what the, Sheriff Corpus has said is basically she's recruited a lot of people, is filling in some of the gaps in the long-term vacancies they've had. She says, give me some time to really complete the kind of reforms that I was elected to do. And I am doing those reforms. I've started these programs. She started, the Guardian program to help identify people who have a mental health issue on the autism spectrum or dementia or something in the home, so that when the sheriff deputies come out of the home, they already know that there's somebody in the home who might have a mental health condition. She started the farm workers swimming program when a couple of people died over on the coast. She started the lights on or lights out or lights on, so that if you get pulled over for a headlight out, they'll give you a $200 voucher to take it to a certain one of, one of the agreed on gas stations or whatever to fix your headlights or your taillights. So she's done all this stuff and basically is say giving me time. I think the concern is that pretty much the entire Deputy Sheriff's Association voted no confidence in Victor Anjay, which is the chief of staff, and all 5 of the captains have asked her to resign. The office organization of sheriff sergeants has asked her to resign, and the Deputy Sheriff's Association has asked her to resign. So those are all the sworn staff that work for her, except for the undersheriff, have asked her to resign. And so I think the concern about safety would be, who's minding the store if something happens. And I hope that helps. So there's 2 sides of it.
Yes. And so I said last question, but I was kidding. I actually have 2 more.
Good,
And one
the
is
time.
we want to encourage everybody to go out and vote. And we have a question about that, about this election. Does this work like a normal election? Can I go vote in person?
Yes, and we can post some of that too in the chat. Basically, you can vote at any vote center that's open, and we have a link to where the vote centers are between now and March 4th. You can mail your ballot in. You should have received it in the mail. And you can mail it in and even postmark it as late as March 4th if it's received by March 11th, but I would not wait that long. If you do have a ballot that you want to mail in, you can also do what I did, and I recommend, is go to one of the secure drop boxes, and the same page that lists vote centers near you lists drop boxes. If you don't know if you're, we'll send these links out later. If you don't know if you're registered, there's a link on the county elections website. You can look it up. And if you go to an in-person vote center anywhere in the county, you can register to vote and vote the same day. The county, as we probably remember, has changed from little polling station precincts in all our neighborhoods, and we have voting centers so that you can vote in any vote center that is open, no matter where you live in the county.
Okay, and then the last thing I'd like to ask you, Nancy, is if you could, just for clarification, go through the steps that would happen if Measure A passes and the board votes to remove the sheriff. What are then the next steps? And
Right.
David, please fill in.
Okay.
if
And
we get something wrong.
If the board votes to remove the sheriff, she's still there. She, again, as David Silberman talked about, the board will come up with a process to allow her to share her own position. And eventually, let's say the board does remove the sheriff. Then they have to choose door 1 or door 2. Door 1, they have 30 days to make this choice. It's not quite as quick as they require it on a game show. Door 1, they appoint an interim sheriff, and they can appoint anyone, that is eligible as interim sheriff. If they choose to do that within 30 days, door 1, that person serves until January 2027. And you're going to say, why the heck January 2027? It's because there's a gubernatorial election in November 2026. That's when any new sheriff or anybody would run for anything. And whoever wins any election in November 2026, the governor, the sheriff, whoever, they take office in January 2027. So again, they could pick door 1 and appoint an interim who'd be there till January 5th, I think, 2027. What if they want door 2? Again, they only have 30 days. Door 2, they set a special election. And that election has to be generally 100, 3 to 4 months out. And David Silberman talked about that. And we'll put the link in the chat so you can read how much. There's a lot of back and forth on that. But whoever wins the special election will serve as sheriff until January 2027. So however you get in there, after 30 days, you're going to kind of know if there's going to be a sheriff already that serves till January 2027. So what if the board dithers and they don't make a decision? Then our charter says the county elections officer has to, if on day 31, the county elections officer has to call a special election for sheriff. And that election would also take place 100 to 132 days out. And whoever wins that will serve until January 2027. So
Okay.
everything changes in November 2026, assuming someone runs for sheriff. And then that decision is made.
Yeah.
The sheriff's current expiration of the term is January 2029 after the presidential election. And the reason for that, if you remember back a couple of years ago, the state said district attorney and sheriff elections are often held in off years, midterm years, and then not a lot of people vote. And we want more people voting for these offices. So we're going to make all district attorney and all sheriff elections align with the presidential election year. And they decided that in kind of 2022. So they could have ended the terms in 2024, but I think that was really a little bit too tacky to let someone have just a 2-year term when they were running for 4 years. So they made it a 6-year term.
Thank you. Mr. Silverman. We can't hear you.
Can't hear me? Here we
Now
go.
we can.
Seems like there's a delay. I'm nervous to correct Nancy because she may very well be right and I may be wrong. But I think when you said 2027, I think that if an appointment is made or a special election is called, the term will go into January 2029. That is my understanding.
Okay.
And I can verify that, and if I'm wrong, I will mea culpa, but I believe it's tied to her existing term, and you are correct. Everything you said about the extension of her term, normally sheriffs and DAs run for 4-year terms, but this is a special one-time only 6-year term. And I believe because of that and the way that the existing charter is, an appointment or an election would go to the end of her existing term, which would be till the beginning of 2029. The only other thing, and again, Nancy, you may be right and I may be wrong. My colleague Brian
You were
Coolidge
right.
is the election expert, but I believe the election for sheriff will occur in June of 2028. No, actually, I think that's what's changed. So now it'll be, I believe, in November. So I think actually, I won't try and correct that because I think I'll be correcting it incorrectly. So,
And I have to say, David, you were so right. I pulled up the new updated slides from the ICAC meeting, and it says if the board appoints someone with 30 days, they serve until the end of the term in January 2029. And in a special election, the person with the highest number of votes is elected for the remainder of the term. And I am so sorry, people, and I'm so glad you're here because I was trying to be so careful and
Yes.
accurate.
you've done great.
And
It's
we
very
will
good.
change our own, messaging in our newsletter and so forth going forward on that.
Okay, thank you all so very much for attending for one, but for all of your very, very thoughtful questions. Mr. Silverman, thank you for being here and talking with the group. It is a very good experience having you here. And at this time, I will turn it back over to my colleague, Jim Lawrence.
Jim?
Thank you for joining us. A mouthful, as Nancy said. But again, thank you for coming out. But more importantly, please vote and talk to your friends and your family and make sure they learn about what you learned tonight. Fixing San Mateo County, though, remains committed to solutions that are permanent and structural. Whatever happens with Measure A, it is a temporary fix, for a specific situation. We believe that accountability should be universal and consistent, which means making it a part of our regular system of government. We applaud the Board of Supervisors for this decision to hire George Cardell, but again, we need a permanent solution to this. So therefore, we're rallying for some transparency to bring that through an Inspector General. So thank you again for joining us tonight. Any questions, as Nancy said, in a day or so, we'll have this online for you to listen to again. Thank you.
And we'll send out corrections. We'll send out the recording and maybe a link to the transcript in the chat. Thanks. Thank you, everyone. And go vote if you haven't. Your vote counts. This is one where it really counts.